Universe Maker's first scroll. Please view the description for trigger warnings to make sure this is content you're comfortable with. Chapter 9. Dr. Miller heard something again, grunts and heavy wheezing, clumsy crumpling of leaves. She smiled. That was no animal. That was the fool she'd thrown into this mess. And he'd managed to get here in front of the others. Dr. Miller checked her watch, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Not only had he made it through alive, he'd beat the last fastest time by 10 minutes. The surprises just never stopped with this guy. She grabbed the heavy pack and walked over to the portal. "Brad, baby, you all right?" she called loudly. "You crazy, evil, conniving, lying, Yep, Brad had survived. "Brad, sweetheart, I've been worried sick. Are you sure you're okay?" "Do I look okay?" he screeched. Dr. Miller hid a laugh. "I don't know, baby. I can't see you." More rustling was heard before Caroline could see movement. A few more steps, and Professor McCullen staggered out of the forest. Carolyn pulled her head back quickly from the portal to hide her gag response that kicked in hard the moment she saw him. The poor man looked horrible. Thick fluids, red, green, some yellow, covered him. Chunks of who knew what clung to the sticky, clumpy liquids. "I couldn't see them coming. After I shot the second animal right in front of me, the silencer jammed, so I couldn't use it anymore," he started to ramble. "The machete came in handy after that, but did you know you have to hit them at least twice in the head before they go down?" "What am I saying? Of course you know. Thanks for filling me in on that little tidbit, you evil, vicious." Dr. Miller swallowed back another gag and looked over again. He was bloody and wounded, but still walking, and none of the injuries looked life-threatening or fatal. Maybe the scars left behind would make him more attractive? No, that lie would only make him angrier. "Any day now, princess, you can get me the hell out of here," he yelled, getting even more angry. Carolyn grabbed the bag. "Here," she yelled just before tossing it to him. "Put this on while I get the rope ladder," she instructed, ducked back out of view of the portal, and didn't move. She heard Brad pick up the bag. "What's this?" "It's a parachute in case you fall off the ladder," she half lied. She heard movement, then the clear clipping of the straps together. Carolyn smiled. She braced herself to look at the slimy little guy again and leaned over the edge. "Okay, love, you're almost home." "I'm gonna throw down the ladder, but you need to back up so it doesn't hit you," she instructed, getting ready to maneuver him right where she needed him. He couldn't see the hole in the ground close by, but she could. Now she just needed to get him to step into the thing. And right now, he needed to back up a little to the right. "The wind is going to blow it right into you, baby. You move to the right," she instructed. Brad eased to the right, but not enough. "A little more to the right, and we'll be all set." There, that was better. He was almost there. Brad stopped. "Hey, why didn't you just drop the ladder for me at the beginning of this stupid thing?" Caroline froze. "What?" she asked, stalling for time to come up with an answer. "If it's as easy as just climbing back up a rope ladder, why didn't you just throw it down for me back?" Caroline cursed. If the fool kept thinking, he'd ruin the whole thing. She snapped her head to look to the left. "What was that?" She let out a terrified screech. It worked. Brad jumped to the right, away from the direction Caroline was looking, right in the hole. He let out a yell that started to get softer. "Don't pull the ripcord until you see ground, baby," she called loudly. "You crazy, evil, lying, treacherous." Caroline was sure the words kept coming, but she couldn't hear him anymore. She pushed herself up from the floor, brushed off the dust that had attached to her knees, and returned to her desk. She'd have about an hour before Brad would be ready for the next stage. Hannah floated down and stepped onto solid ground again. This time there was no soft soil, all rock. She looked around. The sky was black, though she could see all around her, but couldn't tell what was producing the light. The terrain was red, covered with jagged rock spikes that seemed forced out of the ground at odd angles. There were narrow paths between the spikes. Most places looked pretty tight. Hannah turned. It was the same all around her. Wherever they were this time, it did not look friendly. Raffi pointed at the base of one of the larger spikes. The ground around it was covered with smaller dagger-like spikes. We need to avoid these patches, Raffi warned. What are they? They are her young. The mother would not be happy with us if we damaged any one of them, Raffi explained. Great, as if she wasn't worried enough about the big spikes. They were alive? She looked down at Raffi. This is the last stage? Raffi nodded. I think so. Hannah froze. You think so? Raffi shrugged, but also nervously tapped his paws. Nobody has made it past this one anyway. Hannah took a deep breath and let it out before she spoke again. So, not sure how or where this ends? Raffi just looked up at her with his big eyes. Surprisingly, Hannah didn't feel scared. A little annoyed, but she was the one that broke into the crazy professor's office, so there wasn't anyone else she could blame. She smiled down at him. Since you've been here before, what do we do? Raffi pointed in the distance. Hannah stepped forward and squinted. There was something glowing bright but small at the top of a massive rock spike that looked more like a mountain. We have to go to that? She asked. We have to get a hold of that, Raffi corrected. And then what? She wondered. That will take you home. Home. The word hit the bottom of Hannah's stomach and made her feel sick. Memories, this time more recent, flashed. Meisha Manor, her betrayal of Catherine, her scars, both physical and emotional, never being able to trust anyone. She dreaded the weight of her new home, but at the same time, she certainly didn't want to stay here. Not knowing what to do, she just sat down. Raffi walked up to her, laid a paw on her arm. You don't want to go home. It was a statement, not a question. Hannah looked down at her hands. Fear and indecision rolled inside her, but for the first time, it didn't bring tears. What am I going home to? I'm alone. My whole family is gone. I have no friends, no real friends that I can trust. The one thing I was working so hard for, thinking it would make my parents proud, I'm not even sure I even want to do it anymore. Just letting the words out released some of the fear, but the weight of her indecision held her to the spot. Raffi sat down beside her. That's only because you're making all your decisions to please other people. You barely give a thought to yourself except for the time you spend with horses, and that was the first thing you gave up when you felt Catherine needed you. That's the only time I could, Hannah defended. What about the debate club? Raffi countered. I need that for great-grandfather's company, she bit back louder. Or volunteering at the homeless shelter? They already feel like no one cares. If I don't show up, they'll think I don't. Hannah couldn't understand why Raffi wasn't getting it. People have their own lives to lead, Hannah. None of their lives are more important than yours. Raffi stood up and stepped in front of her to look her in the eyes. I'm not saying you shouldn't help anyone or that you should be completely selfish. What you're doing is good, really good, and it matters. I'm just saying that when a new obligation comes along, don't let the one thing you do for yourself be the first thing you push to the side. Hannah took another deep breath. The thought made her stomach do another unpleasant flip-flop, but something inside her brain quieted at the same time. Okay, horseback riding stays a top priority. I think I can do that. Raffi kept looking at her a moment longer before nodding his head. Good. Now, as far as not knowing if you still want what you've been working so hard for, Catherine is right. You could always marry someone to handle the business end of things while you do something that makes you happy, Raffi offered. Hannah smiled. Like breeding horses? Raffi chirped as his belly jiggled. Sounds like you already know what you want. Maybe, she wondered. Or I still run the company and have others run the horse breeding farm that I oversee. Sounds busy, Raffi warned. Hannah took another deep breath. Her head came up and her eyes raised to the shining speck hovering above the massive stone spike. Turns out I like busy. What do you say we go catch that whatever it is, and go home. I'm suddenly interested to see what I'll be doing tomorrow." She got to her feet, and Ralphie nodded as they began to move. Together they walked completely around any dagger spike patches and made their way through the narrow gaps between solid rock obstacles. The ragged cracks and chips tore at her clothes and scratched her skin, but it didn't matter. She'd already learned she needed to push through pain instead of avoiding it. It was the only way she would ever get where she needed to go. Professor McCullen landed hard, crumpled to the ground with a loud grunt and hollow thud. The parachute followed shortly after, floating softly and covering him completely. He wrestled with the light fabric as it stuck to the sticky, thick fluids covering his body. By the time he freed himself from the chute, he was relatively goo-free. He looked around. Everything was dismal, gray, barren, and thick, angry clouds overhead. And nothing else. Brad waited. Still nothing happened. No animals chased him. There wasn't even any sound other than the rolling thunder that echoed from everywhere. Scanning the sky, he finally saw a dark spot. It was hard to see since it was only slightly darker than the rest of the sky. This one was close, and there didn't seem to be anything between him and it. He looked around one more time just to be sure he hadn't missed anything, and then shrugged. The land was absolutely flat and completely bare. There wasn't anything to miss. He reached for the clamps that held the parachute pack to his body. Right before he released the clamps, he stopped. Caroline was never going to help him get out of this. She was just going to keep tricking him until he, what was he supposed to do? For the first time since this whole thing started, he started to think, with his brain this time. She'd tricked him over and over to keep him on this stupid, whatever this was. She obviously wanted something from it, and more than likely intended to trick it away from him once he got it. Brad smiled. He didn't need her help to fall into the next portal. She'd given him hints up till now, but he'd been the one to survive the last part. He knew he could figure out the next without her, get whatever she was after, then make her pay to get it back from him. He chuckled to himself as if he'd ever let it go. But first, if the next portal was anything like the last, he still needed this parachute. He turned to survey the damage done to the delicate fabric. Colorful smears blotched several areas. The ropes that held the pack didn't look too tangled. He carefully gathered it into his arms and made his way to the next portal. As he neared, he slowed. Each step he carefully placed to make as little noise as possible. He watched the portal above to make sure Caroline wasn't looking. Just a few more steps. That's all he needed, and he'd make it without Caroline knowing. It was his only chance to make her pay. Oh, how he would enjoy that. He made it. His toes were at the border. One more step and he'd plunge into whatever came next. He just needed to make sure he didn't make a sound. He gathered the yards of fabric closer to him, reached his hand around and clamped it over his mouth. Without giving himself too much time to think about it, he hopped in and quickly disappeared into the darkness. After the tumbling blackness and silver swirls cleared, he let go of the fabric he had a death grip on. It flew above him and opened, mostly. Part of its left side had gotten knotted, and he was falling faster than he had before. After surveying the parachute, he looked down and had to clamp his hand over his mouth again to stifle his scream. Sharp spikes below, all pointing right at him, ready to rip him apart. Maybe he should have waited to find out what Carolyn had to say. They neared quickly. One came close, but he was able to kick it away with his shoe. The movement just sent him straight into another one. He pulled against the ropes attached to the parachute, pulled his knees to his chest, and missed the next one. A third was heading for his chest. His hand shot out and grabbed the thing just below the pointed tip and pushed away. Now at least he was below the sharp ends. Most of them, anyway. He slammed into the thick side of one and rolled off as he continued his descent. Another hit him hard on the right side that sent him into another that gave him a glancing blow on his left. Below, tiny blade-like ones scattered all across the ground, leaving him nowhere safe to land. And they were coming fast. Most likely his momentum was going to drag his body a few feet before it stopped. This was going to be messy and hurt a lot. He closed his eyes and braced for what was about to hit. All he felt was a sharp tug upwards and then the sensation of swinging back and forth. Cautiously, he opened his eyes, one and then the other. He was swinging in midair, inches above the short spikes. He looked up. His parachute had caught on one of the tips of the larger spikes. Professor McCullen started to laugh. "Take that, Dr. Witch!" he yelled and waved his hands in celebration. He looked down and found a small area that was rock dagger free, timed his swings, and released the clamps at just the right time. He landed where he wanted, but not at the right angle. He stumbled. His hand scraped against the tip of one spike, and his skin there instantly ripped. A small chip broke off the rock. He cursed and pulled his hand back to his chest. Rocks fell. The sound came from somewhere in the distance, instantly getting his attention. He looked toward the noise. Far ahead of him, two figures were moving up a giant rock mound. It was sloped on the side they were climbing, making it clearly easier than if they had tried any other direction. Ahead of them was something shiny. No portal this time. They were headed straight toward that thing, glowing, in the air. It must be what Carolyn wanted, what this whole crazy trip was for. It must also be his way home, and those two were about to get it. He was more than a mile away, and they were very close to the object. He'd never catch them in time. Thinking quickly, he grabbed the gun out of his bag. It was covered in green fluid. The silencer was completely jammed, and he quickly started to twist it off the main barrel. There were no animals here. He didn't have to worry about the noise anymore. The small attachment finally released from the gun. Brad raised the gun and took aim. A shadow passed over his pointing arm and distracted him from pulling the trigger as he looked up. The towering spike above him was moving. It was actually moving. A rock was moving. His scientific brain was fascinated as he watched the rock's sharp tip rise high above him and start a fast descent. It moved so gracefully and smoothly, nothing like he would have expected from stone. His mind started to race through the possibilities of studying such a phenomenon. He'd be famous. And its speed was much faster than he would have thought possible and seemed to be headed for the middle of his chest. McCullen finally realized his danger and dove out of the rock's path. The massive spike hit the ground hard, shaking everything around him. The tip raised back up, high into the air, and started another fast descent. He turned off his scientific brain and let loose his survival skills. He jumped to his feet and started to run. He quickly scanned the distance and turned a little to the left so he was running straight for the other two people, still getting closer to the object. He watched in horror as the other two figures came closer and closer to the object. It was within reaching distance. They were going to get it, and he would be left in this horrible place. He tried to take aim again, but the ground shook hard from another impact just behind him. He stumbled, had to use his pointing arm to balance before he fell over. He kept running, raised his hand and aimed at the taller figure, the one that was reaching for the object and was about to get it. It disappeared. Before she could grab it, the object disappeared. The two figures started to look around. What had they done? How could they have lost it? The ground shook hard just to his right. He had to find a way out of this, and those two seemed to know more than he did. He watched the two walk around the large spike and slide down its far side. That's where he needed to go. Caroline continued to write, never looked up to see that the portal in her floor changed from a dark gray to an eerie red. She never expected Brad to make it through the next stage in less than an hour. She just needed to figure out a way to make him want to jump into the hole more than he wanted to keep his greatest desire.